Hey guys, what's going on? It is Brooke, or that one undead DM, back at it again for another video. If you will notice from my last post on the homebrew review of the Bloodhunter, I gave a lot of opinions, but didn't quite explain a lot of the math behind the reasons that I gave. So this is going to be a new series to coincide with homebrew review called Homebrew Math, in which I give you, the viewer, the math to make an educated guess as to what my thought process when reviewing homebrew will be in terms of damage per round or the viability of the class in terms of a combat scenario. Because realistically, every class can be viable in a roleplay scenario, but what really matters in terms of how to determine how good a class is how it fares in combat when compared to its brethren. So, without further ado, let's get started. So, in my previous video, I stated that the Bloodhunter, in comparison to another class, predominantly the fighter, is not as good. I still stand by that statement. However, the fighter, without taking into account Battlemaster, it does have slightly lower damage numbers in terms of a pure martial. So, and that's mainly because the fighter doesn't have any attack augmentations like the Bloodhunter. Where the Bloodhunter has their Crimson Right, the fighter doesn't really have anything like that outside of the Battlemaster subclass. And since I wanted to make a very fair comparison between the two, I decided to change the class over to Ranger. And for this comparison of the math, I determined that at levels 4, I apologize, at levels 8 and... Oh no, I was correct. So, from levels 1 through 3, I was going to do the math based on a +3 dexterity. And then from levels 4 through 7, we're going to be with a +4 dexterity and a +5 and anything past level 8, assuming that you took those ability score improvements. Both classes are also given a level 1 feat of crossbow expert, and each character has also been given 2 hand crossbows for the purposes of this experiment. And I will be explaining the numbers and the equations that I'm going to be using here. So to catch everyone up, the Bloodhunter will be using their Blood Maledict when it is not Blood Maledict, but their Crimson Right when they get it at 2nd level. And the Ranger will be using their version of a Crimson Right, which is the favored foe offered by Tasha's Cauldron of Everything, which gives them a very similar damage amplifier as the Bloodhunter's Crimson Right. So, without further ado, let's explain. So you'll notice here at level 1, they have a +3 dexterity like I stated. And like I stated in the previous video, every attack has a standard percent chance to hit of 65%, so that's 0.65. And the reason that at level 1 they don't add their Crimson Right is because they don't get it until level 2. So for this, it's just a single attack, which is 3.5 since it's a hand crossbow, plus 3 for dexterity, times the chance to hit, which is 0.65. And since you're hitting twice, because you're taking the attack action, and then as a bonus action you're using your crossbow expert feat, that's 2 times, meaning you have a total damage per round on average of 8.45 per round. And that averages out to a total of 25.35 damage over the course of 3 rounds. Now, if we look over here at Ranger, you'll notice that the calculation's a little bit different. And that's because Favored Foe, they get access to it at level 1. And it doesn't require a bonus action to use, and it automatically triggers on the first hit instead of every hit like we'll see in the Bloodhunter section with their Crimson Right. So the calculation here is a little bit different, where you take the 3.5 for the hand crossbow, the 2.5 for the average of a d4 roll that you would get at level 1 with your Favored Foe, plus 3 from your dexterity, times the chance to hit, and then you would add the additional chance to hit for the bonus action attack without the favored foe, since it only triggers on your first turn. It only triggers on your first attack for each turn. So that would equate to a 10.075 damage per round for a total of 30.225 damage over the course of 3 rounds. Now you'll notice here at level 1 the Bloodhunter is losing out 5 damage to the Ranger. Now again, this is on average, so it could be more, could be less, it could be roughly even. But, 5 points of damage, it's not that much of a gap, but it's still a gap nonetheless. And in level 2, we have to do the calculations a little bit differently. So you'll notice here in the level 2 section for Bloodhunter, and this is going to be a thing you're going to notice throughout the rest of the calculations, is that you don't multiply this by 2. And that's because in order to activate your Crimson Right, you have to use your bonus action to activate it on one of your hand crossbows. Only one. And Crossbow Expert specifically states that you have to attack with a separate hand crossbow you are wielding, meaning you are holding 2 different hand crossbows, and your Crimson Right can only be activated on one item per turn, because it uses up your bonus action, and in the ability, I'll show you right here, it states right here in your Crimson Right, as a bonus action, you can activate any right you know on one weapon you are holding. Meaning to get the full effect of your Crimson Right on both of your weapons, you have to expend your bonus action on both of your on 2 turns just to get your weapons to both get the Crimson Right feature. So for the first 2 rounds, since you don't use your bonus action for your Crossbow Expert attack, you are getting 5.85 damage since you're giving up your bonus action to get that additional 2.5 that the Ranger already gets. So for the second round, you're using your bonus action again to activate it on your second hand crossbow. And you'll notice here that for the first 2 rounds of combat, the Ranger outdamages you by double. Almost double your damage you are losing out to a Ranger, because they're not using their bonus action. But then you'll notice at round 3, you're getting equivalent damage on round 3, as you'll see here. And then you actually end up losing DPR over the course of 3 rounds by doing this, because in order to get equivalent damage to a Ranger, you have to expend 2 bonus actions to do it, which gives you a total DPR of 23.4 as opposed to the 30.225 that the Ranger gets up until level 4, where the DPR now changes because now your ability score improvement comes in and you get a +4 to your damage as opposed to a +3. So now you do this whole calculation again where you're expending a bonus action for 2 turns to get your Blood Curse, not Blood Curse, I keep saying Blood Curse, your Crimson Right active, but this increases your DPR to 6.5, which at round 3 gives you a 13 damage for that round, which is an average 26 damage per round. If we look over here at the Ranger, you notice that you're still losing damage on the first 2 rounds, and now you've actually fallen behind even more by 8 points of damage, because the average here is 34.125 as opposed to your 26. Now here's where it gets interesting. At level 5, because you have +4 and you attack twice and your your Crimson Right triggers on all of your weapon attacks using that weapon, you now can take the previous equation of level 4 and multiply it by 2, which gives you 14.3 for 2 rounds and then 21.45 for the 3rd round. So at level 5, you are doing more damage on round 3, and you're doing more damage over 3 rounds than the normal Ranger by 1.3. So you're on average dealing about 1 point of damage more than a Ranger. But then at Ranger at level 6, since your DPR stays the same at 50.05, theirs actually goes up to 16.9 because their favorite foe goes from a D4 to a D6, which now they actually match you in DPR. This is very interesting because that means that one level later that you have just usurped them, you guys are now equal. But once again, if you look at the numbers here, at level 6, you are dealing 14.3 damage for 2 rounds, and you're losing out to 2 damage. So that's a total of 4 points of damage, maybe 5 points of damage difference. Because this is really a 2.6 damage difference per round. So that is a 5.2 damage difference over the course of 2 rounds. And in order to make that up, you'd have to meet it. And so at round 3, you actually make up for the damage by that point because you get 16.9, you have 21.45 damage in round 3. So you're actually making up the damage by round 3. But as we all know, the average length of a combat doesn't last 3 rounds. If you have a decent number of players, or if your players are properly focus firing the enemy, then you're not really getting to 3 rounds of combat with all your action, bonus action, reaction, spells being cast by your spellcasters, buffs, debuffs, magic items. So this could be skewed one way or the other. In terms of if you have magic items, what kind of homebrew is your DM allowing? What kind of abilities do you have on certain subclasses that you may pick? Mind you, this is taking into account the base class, no subclasses taken in yet. This is just an overall look at the base classes and see how well they do. So right here, you actually meet them at level 6 and 7, because at level 6, oh, pardon me, at level 6, your favorite foe goes from a D4 to a D6. But then immediately at level 8, because you get that ability score improvement, let's look at that. So you go from a +4 to a +5, meaning you go from a 14.3 here in the Bloodhunter to 15.6 for 2 rounds, and then 23.4 on round 3 to give you a grand total of 54.6 for levels 8, 9, and 10. And then at 11th levels when it increases from a D6 to a D8. So if we go over here to level 8, you're still losing 3.25 damage per round for the first 2 rounds, meaning you're losing 6.5 damage. And so you have to be dealing 24.35. Right. Yeah. 23.5 damage. And you're roughly getting that. So by the time you reach this point, which is in the optimizer community seen as pretty close to endgame, you are now matching the ranger in terms of damage, and you are dealing slightly more damage over the course of 3 rounds at level 11. When to get somewhere close to you, they have to go to level 14. Once again, we're not going past levels like 10 to 14 anyway. This is kind of the benchmark of this is endgame. Anything past this point is kind of going to be overpowered, especially since spellcasters can get very high level spells at this point. Now, it's going to stay like this for a while for Bloodhunter until you reach 17th level, when you become where the Crimson Right goes to a D8. D10, I apologize. In which you do 18.2. So with an 18.2 versus a 19.5 here, since the damage scaling of your favorite foe stops at level 14 at a D8, it's going to stay at a 19.5 for the rest of the game. meaning the maximum amount of damage that a ranger can do without using any other abilities or spells, and without Hunter's Mark, which isn't a good spell to begin with. See Pack Tactics video on why Hunter's Mark is a trap for more information. But 58.5 is the damage that you're going to be dealing on average. So to even match that, they are getting that at 11th level, which certainly isn't bad in terms of DPR. But you got to remember one thing: you're sacrificing more damage in the first 2 rounds and getting less consistent damage early on compared to the Ranger. Because remember, in order to somewhat meet this, at 14th level, you have to get 2.6. You're losing 2.6 damage each round for 2 rounds. So that's 5.2. You're missing out on 5.2 damage for 2 rounds total, when the Ranger can just do that right now. And there's a saying that Pack Tactics has that states, damage solves, and damage now is better than damage later. So having to sacrifice 5 to 5, 6, 7 points of damage for 2 rounds, which is half of a great weapon master. This isn't even taking into account sharpshooter, by the way. The fact that you're losing that much damage for 2 rounds just to meet them, if not slightly exceed them by that point, is not good. Especially since you gotta remember one thing: your Crimson Right and your Blood Curses both take up your bonus action. Meaning your two main sources of damage or utility are fighting to compete for your bonus action. If we wanted to go the really pedantic way of saying, well, why not we just activate Blood Curse of the Marked and you get to roll more damage for your Hemocraft? Well, then you gotta remember one thing. The Blood Curse of the Mark, takes your bonus action. So in order to get the most damage, you'd have to go all the way out to round 4 to get that. Meaning you'd have to go round 1, bonus action, Crimson Right on crossbow 1. Then round 2, bonus action, Crimson Right on crossbow 2. Then round 3, Blood Maledict onto the creature in order to get marked, and then you can amplify it if you want, but it's not necessary. And then round 4, that's when you would do the additional damage, and then maybe you would deal more damage than the baseline Ranger. But the fact that you have to go 4 rounds, 3 rounds at minimum, to get equivalent damage to the Ranger is sad. And this is like the gold standard of classes. This is the best half-caster in the game. This is by far the best class that isn't a full caster in the game. This beats out every martial, and this beats out every single half-caster in the game. So the fact that you have to spend 2 turns to make it match when they just get that damage without expending a bonus action, and the fact that you're also losing the damage early on to activate it as a bonus action, because now you are using that bonus action to activate your Crimson Right on both your weapons, that's not that good. And I know some people are going to say, well, what happens if you just activate your Crimson Right on the first one and you don't activate it on the second one? Then yes, you would be correct. You would essentially just take this damage and you would just scale it across. But you would also add the 3.5 plus 3 times 0.65 to that. So you would take the 5.85 and then you just add the result of 4.225 to it, and you'd get around 9 points of damage. 9 point some odd damage here, resulting in a lower damage output here. So really not activating your Crimson Right on both of your crossbows ends up netting you less damage. And yes, you could activate your Blood Curse somewhere in this chain. Like, round 1, you activate your Blood Curse, and then around 2, you activate your Crimson Right, and then you could do more damage there. But the damage you're still losing that bonus action attack. You're still losing out to the Ranger in terms of DPR because they don't have to use their bonus action for anything other than the additional damage. You're losing out on that for the sake of conditional damage. And the conditional damage of the Marked, which is pretty much the only one that directly helps with your damage output, while as everything else has a condition, like say, where is it? Saw it earlier. The Exorcist, where they can deal damage, but they have to be charmed, frightened, or possessed. Or the Bloated Agony, where they have to fail a save. I think. And they take a d8 necrotic damage. So you could probably do this, but it's still taking up your bonus action. And you're only adding 4.5 damage to it. So it's not that much of a difference, but you're still losing out on that 3.5 plus 3 damage. And 4.5 damage on average for losing your bonus action, which is, I will show you. So a bonus action attack with Crossbow Expert would be 3.5 plus 3, and then you would multiply that by 0.65, so you're losing 4.225 damage, meaning if you use the Blood Curse of Bloated Agony, it could work, but again, you gotta remember one thing. This 4.5 damage, this quote-unquote guaranteed 4.5 damage, is if it makes more than one attack a turn. Meaning it could just choose not to do that. And if your Dungeon Master is smart, and I hope he is, knowing that this is going to affect them, you may only get that damage on the first turn that this is active. Because for the rest of the time that this is active, if you amplified it, it's just going to make a single attack. Yeah, you're limiting its damage output. But the fact that you had to spend a bonus action and you only got that damage once is fine. It's definitely more of a utility because the DM now has to choose, does it want to take that 4.5 damage every round for a minute, or does it want to only make a single attack, thus lowering the monster's DPR? Which both are a fantastic situation to be in, but the fact is 4.5 damage versus 4.225 damage is not even a full point of damage. And having to rely on the Dungeon Master to be dumb enough to make more than one attack this turn and trigger that is not reliable. Especially if the Dungeon Master's playing smart. So, overall, you can see that the math over the course of 3 rounds, yes, they can do more damage. The Bloodhunter can do more damage, but it takes a while for it to get to that point, where you have to go 2 rounds of combat just to meet the to meet the Ranger, and even then, you don't truly meet the Ranger in the first 2 rounds of DPR outside of level 17 and above, and that's because their feature that gives them bonuses to damage caps out at a d8, while yours increases by an additional die size, which only gives you the slightest a bit of edge. And you're really only out damaging them later on in the game. So on the 3rd round, you're basically meeting the DPR loss that you had when you were activating your bonus action to use your Crimson Right. Because like I said before, 5.8 versus 10.075. So if we subtract 5.85, that's 4.225 damage that you're missing every round for 2 rounds. So if we multiply that by 2, that means you're missing 8.45 damage every round. you're basically missing your whole level 1's damage worth of damage in this. So the amount of damage that you make up for in round 3 has to equal this, but it doesn't. It doesn't. You're only getting an increase of 5.85. And once again, you're missing out on this. You're missing out on the 8.45. So, you're missing 2 additional points of damage that the ranger doesn't have to worry about because it just has it. And you really only start to get that damage back at around level 5 and start to meet the amount of damage that the ranger can do without expending its bonus action to activate an ability that honestly should just be a thing you can do. And it should be available to be used on all of your weapon attacks. Not weapon attacks, but it should be able to be activated on any weapon or weapons you are wielding at the time. So if you're wielding 2 hand crossbows and you're going for a crossbow build, it should just activate on both of your hand crossbows, no questions asked. Because if I, as a ranger, can hit a guy with a crossbow and get your Hemocraft die worth of damage without expending a bonus action, and I can deal twice your damage at level 2 and 3 for the first 2 rounds, and you only outdamage me by a single point of damage on the 3rd round of combat at early levels, is not good. And like I said, this is just taking into account 1 feat. If I included Sharpshooter in here, it honestly wouldn't change all that much. It would just make the damage numbers slightly higher. So, for instance, the DPR over 3 rounds may go up a little bit for both of them, maybe go down a little bit in some areas, especially right here at levels 2 and 3, because you're expending your bonus action. So you may be making up that damage a little bit, but you gotta remember the ranger is also keeping their bonus action, and they can activate Crossbow Expert on their bonus action attack as well. So you guys might say that Sharpshooter may make these calculations just a little bit closer, but it's not going to be by a significant margin. So that's my reasoning as to why I say that Bloodhunter, mainly its Crimson Rite and Blood Maledict feature needs to be changed to be as a free action, like the Blood, not the Blood Maledict, but the Crimson Rite needs to be a free action, because losing out on half of the Ranger's damage to activate an additional 1 point of damage on average is not good. It's just not a good thing, and it's not really fun. Like, don't get me wrong, I think the Bloodhunter has amazing flavor for what it's worth, but I had to think about why people would play a class that, when shown the numbers, shown they're not that good. And I equated it to going to a fancy restaurant. You don't really get the fancy food because of how it tastes, you get it because of the way it looks and how it is presented. The Bloodhunter is that fancy meal. It's not good. It's not a good class, objectively speaking, but it looks nice and it sounds nice and it has really good flavor in terms of, you know, a mage going out of control and sacrificing their blood in order to thwart their foes. But other than that, it has no sustenance to really make their gameplay worth playing over a ranger with a similar theme. And the ranger is kind of that meal that you get that is very filling, very tasty, but it doesn't look that good to the eye. Like, you get it and you're like, man, this looks kind of bad, but it tastes amazing. So, I hope this helped everyone determine my thoughts on the Bloodhunter. If you like the video, like, comment, subscribe, and I will see you all next time for the next episode. Peace out.